Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, you can visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to your forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we may have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can also email us at the email address at the bottom of your screen. Taking a look at our breakup maps, starting off in the southwestern part of the state by the Kuskokwim River. We are looking at the Kuskokwim River being pretty ice-free at this moment. However, there is still some ice in areas further to the north, but we are not expecting that to have much of an impact on any flooding in the area along the Kuskokwim River, so most of that has broken up now. However, by the Yukon River up further to the north, we are expecting some areas near the border starting to break up, so looking for activity to start to begin on the Yukon River. Now for our fire danger, out over the very far eastern portions of the interior from the Fairbanks area down the Tanana River Valley, we are seeing some areas of higher danger. We do have a special weather statement out for the area from Nenana to Northway in the Tanana Valley, and that is also north to Chicken and 40 Mile Country. Moving ahead to our satellite imagery, we'll start off out over the Gulf of Alaska. We have high pressure out here pushing in over the southern part of the state for a lot of the clearing that we can see out over mainland Alaska. However, looking off further to the west, we have a low pressure system moving up to the south of the Alaska Peninsula, bringing in some cloud cover out over southwestern Alaska and a lot of warmer air with that. Further to the north, we have a somewhat stationary boundary just kind of hanging out over the northern part of the Bering Sea. Warmer air on the right-hand side of that. We are seeing some more areas of rain out there, but colder to the west. We're seeing a lot more areas where there's potential for snowfall. And then way out west over the western part of the Bering Sea, we have a low pressure system bringing in some snow showers to areas around the western Aleutian Islands. Taking us down for the rest of today's weather, there is that low pressure system out over the western part of the Bering Sea, bringing in snow to areas for the western Aleutians. However, a little bit further to the south and east, we do have some warmer air coming up, some rain showers out there headed towards the central Aleutian Islands. Here's our stationary boundary out from St. Lawrence Island, down through Nunavik Island, down through the Alaska Peninsula. On the eastern side of that, warm enough air from that southerly flow to bring rain to those locations. And some areas of rain continued along the Alaska Peninsula out by Kodiak Island as well. Some areas around Bristol Bay, Nushagak Hills, and then up further to the north in the lower Yukon Valley up into the Norton Sound area as well, expecting to see rain. And not quite to Nome yet, but that is going to continue to push further to the north. Out over mainland Alaska, starting up to the north, out over the Brooks Range, we do have areas of high pressure out there, keeping all that precipitation off to the west. And similarly down in the Gulf, high pressure dominating, keeping a lot of the rain activity out further to the west and keeping south central Alaska, for the most part, clear of any of that precipitation. That continues out over to the Panhandle area where we are expecting to see the void of rain for those locations as well. Moving into tonight, high pressure continuing to dominate out over the Gulf, keeping the Panhandle and most of central and eastern parts of south central Alaska out of any of the rain. However, our front very slowly pushing off to the east, still bringing rain to the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay areas. Kodiak Island starting to push a little bit further east now to the southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula. Areas a little bit at higher elevation like the Alaska Range, going to see snow and not rain, but as we push off further to the west out towards the Norton Sound area, expecting those locations to be in rain. And then rain up by the Kotzebue Sound area as well until we get to the western parts of the Brooks Range, still cold enough there to see snowfall. As we move to the west of our stationary boundary for the St. Lawrence Island area, however, a little bit colder on that side, expecting to see some snowfall. Then out over the central Aleutian Islands, warmer there, we're going to see some rain showers for tonight, and then out by the western Aleutian Islands, our trough moving in, going to bring some snow to the area. On Wednesday, that trough slowly pushing to the east, Getting a little bit warmer as well, starting to transition over to rain, as well as some isolated rain showers for the central Aleutian Islands. Our slow-moving system out over the eastern part of the Bering, with that main low moving now over the Nunavik Island area, bringing rain throughout the area of southwest Alaska, Alaska Peninsula, down into Kodiak as well, up through the Norton Sound area, out by Galena now, and then up north to the Kotzebue Sound area and further up towards Point Hope. Again, it's a little bit colder out to the west of this stationary boundary, bringing in snow for the St. Lawrence Island area. High pressure still dominating much of mainland Alaska till we get to a weak area of instability just outside of the Sitka area, bringing in some light rain to those locations, not quite pushing into Sitka, but just off the coastline there on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, we are going to have some more rain starting to push in as this high pressure starts to push further to the south. We are going to get rain throughout the Panhandle area all along the North Gulf Coast ahead of our frontal system that's now pushing further inland, bringing rain throughout south central, up into the central and western parts of the interior through the Galena area, and continue to be up into the Kotzebue Sound area with some rain still behind that system down into the YK Delta and Bristol Bay areas. Pulling in some colder air behind this low pressure system, starting to wrap that in towards the Nunavik Island area, St. Lawrence Island. But down further to the south in the central and western Aleutians, we are going to see some rain out there on Thursday. Our low temperatures for the Aleutian Islands dropping down into mid to upper 30s and to the mid to upper 30s for much of the Bristol Bay area. Dillingham a little bit warmer at 41 degrees. In the 40s for much of the YK Delta area. Macoriac a little bit colder there tonight, 29 degrees. Mid-30s for the Seward Peninsula, and then as we get up along the Arctic coastline, dropping down as we push further off to the east into the teens for eastern locations of the Arctic coast. Down into the interior part of the state, dropping down many locations below freezing, but some areas, especially there at Delta Junction, not dropping down below freezing, but in fact staying up around 38 degrees for a low tonight. Mid to upper 30s for much of south central, and right around 40 degrees for many locations in the Panhandle, some getting a little bit lower than that. Wednesday afternoon jumping up into the 50s, Skagway getting up to 63, mid-50s for much of south central Alaska, up into the 60s for the interior part of the state. Fairbanks the warmest at 68 degrees. Along the Arctic coastline, only getting up into the mid to upper 20s for many locations, a little bit warmer out to the west. Down along the west coast of the state in the 40s, getting up into the 50s for the YK Delta area and for Bristol Bay area, and then in the 40s all along the Aleutian Islands. Taking us into Thursday morning temperatures, mid-30s for the Aleutian Islands into the Bristol Bay area, mid-30s as well for the YK Delta area, mid to lower 30s for much of the Seward Peninsula area, and then up along the Arctic coastline again, getting a lot colder as we get further off to the east into the teens for many locations. Interior part of the state dropping down into the mid-30s for the most part, and south central Alaska dropping down into the upper 30s, while the Panhandle will be pretty similar, dropping down to near 40. For our afternoon highs, getting up to 50 for all along the North Gulf Coast and the interior, only getting up into the 20s along the Arctic coastline and in the 40s along the west coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off looking at our flying weather. Out over the Bering Sea, a lot of MVFR conditions with some areas of IFR, especially out over the eastern part of the Bering and making their way over southwest Alaska, up into the Seward Peninsula area as well, including Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound area, and then up along the Arctic coast. Some isolated areas of MVFR conditions through much of the interior down into south central Alaska, with the heaviest stuff out further to the west, and then some IFR conditions out over the Gulf with some MVFR conditions coming up along the North Gulf coastline on Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon, pretty similar conditions out over the Gulf and into the interior, with south central Alaska seeing some MVFR as well. Some areas of MVFR in the interior, especially out west, some IFR along the coast. Some of those IFR conditions down over southwest starting to push up a little bit, but still a lot of IFR all along the west coast of the state, down into the eastern parts of the Bering and out through the rest of the Bering as well. Then as we look into Thursday morning, the Bering is going to be pretty similar. Some of the more southern locations around the Aleutian seeing some more MVFR conditions, but a lot of IFR further north in the Bering Sea and along the west coast of the state. Some areas of MVFR pushing a little bit further into the state over western and central parts of the state, down in south central as well, but some IFR conditions along the Arctic coastline and some MVFR and IFR throughout the areas of the Gulf, not quite making it very far into the inside waters of the Panhandle. As we move into Thursday afternoon, those MVFR conditions will now spread into the inside waters down in the Panhandle area with IFR conditions over much of the Gulf of Alaska and into areas of South Central as well. As we move up into the interior part of the state, MVFR conditions over much of the interior getting to be more IFR conditions as we get towards the west coast of the state and down into southwest Alaska as well with those IFR conditions. And then a mixture of MVFR and IFR throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands Thursday afternoon. For our passes, we'll start off up north with AKwx Pass, starting off with VFR conditions dropping down to marginal in the afternoon. That is going to be true of Adigan Pass as well. MVFR conditions expected for both Lake Clark and for Merrill. Rainy Pass also should be marginal throughout the day Wednesday. Windy Pass also going to be MVFR conditions on Wednesday. Isabel Pass will start off marginal and improve to VFR conditions later in the afternoon. And Mentasta Pass should be far enough to the east to stay out of any of the more restrictive visibilities and ceilings, so they should be VFR throughout the day on Wednesday. Tenita Pass will start off marginal and improve to VFR in the afternoon. And Portage will stay VFR throughout the day, as well as both Chilkoot and White. For our freezing levels, surface freezing lines, pretty cold near the surface in a lot of places. We have some warmer air coming up from the south with freezing heights at as high as 8,000 feet coming in overriding a lot of that colder air out over mainland Alaska. As we get further off to the west, however, we are expecting some of the colder temperatures dropping back down out over the Bering Sea. For our icing, way out west above 6,000 feet by the western Aleutian Islands. Along the west coast, starting between 4,000 and 8,000 feet in southern locations down by Bristol Bay. A little bit lower as we get further to the north, 4,000 to 7,000 feet up by the Kotzebue Sound area. And then just to the northeast of the Panhandle area, above 6,000 feet expected there. Our jet stream just off to the eastern portions of our area, northwesterly portion of the jet, 105 knots there, dipping down back over much of western Canada, and then along the west coast of our state, 70 to 65 knots coming out of a southerly direction. Strongest portion of the jet well south of the Aleutian Islands, around 125 knots out of a northwesterly direction. Taking us down to 9,000 feet. Flow around our low pressure out over the western Bering gives a lot of southerly winds out over the Bering, anywhere from 15 to 35 knots. Strongest over the central part of the Bering. Southwesterly flow along the Aleutians, 15 to 25 knots. Strongest near the central Aleutian Islands. As we move up the west coast of this state, primarily southerly flow, 20 to 25 knots. A little bit stronger by the Alaska Peninsula, 35 knots expected there. Becoming pretty light and variable over much of the interior part of the state, and then more northwesterly as we get off to the eastern portions of the state. Around 30 to 35 knots out of that northwesterly direction out over the Panhandle. Taking us down to 3,000 feet, pretty similar flow, anywhere from 25 to 30 knots near the Panhandle area. Becoming pretty light and variable out over much of the mainland part of the interior of the state, and southerly flow along the west coast, 20 to 25 knots there. Again, a little bit stronger by the Alaska Peninsula, out around 30 knots. We have some circulation around a weak low at these lower levels by Nunavik Island. They're causing some weak northerly winds on the western side of that, 15 down to as low as 10 knots there. And then some flow out of a southerly direction, 15 up to as high as 30 knots over the Bering. For turbulence, we have below 4,000 feet up to the northwest and below 4,000 feet by the Alaska Peninsula, below 6,000 feet for the Panhandle.
Dual polarization technology is a major upgrade to the current radar system. It allows forecasters a better idea of what's actually out there and can help keep you safe.
Current radar technology transmits and receives information in the horizontal direction, which is very limited. Dual polarization technology, in addition to the horizontal, transmits and receives vertical energy, which allows forecasters to get information about the size, shape, and phase of the precipitation. We can use that information to better determine the precipitation type to expect at your given location.
There you have it. This new technology is currently being installed in radars across the country and is already being used by National Weather Service forecasters to produce better, more accurate forecasts. Learn more here and follow us. Want to know about the future of weather radar? Well, the National Severe Storms Lab has it here with its new phased array radar. Let's check it out.
It's a non-moving radar. It has 4 faces of the antenna, each pointing in different directions. One of the big advantages is that we're seeing so far, it can sample the area around the radar in less than a minute, maybe even a half a minute. And this is 5-6 times faster than what they can do today.
NSSL is leading the development of future weather radar with this project. Learn more here and follow us. The Storm Prediction Center is one of the NOAA weather partners. They are located in the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. Greg Carbon gives us a glimpse into what the SPC does.
Our mission is to analyze and forecast severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds from those thunderstorms across the lower 48 states, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. One of the primary missions of the Storm Prediction Center is the issuance of severe thunderstorm and tornado watches across the country when conditions appear to be coming together to support the development of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes.
The world-class meteorologists in the Storm Prediction Center specialize in severe weather and keeping you safe. Learn more here and follow us.
The National Severe Storms Lab is working on increasing the lead time for severe weather warnings. The national average for tornado warnings is currently 13 minutes, but more notice would be helpful, especially for those in charge of moving large groups to shelter. Warn on Forecast will help forecasters issue hazardous weather warnings earlier. The project will give them more info about the chances of strong winds, large hail, and even tornadoes.
Currently, warnings are created by forecasters looking at the atmosphere outside, understanding its volatility, and then comparing that to how they see the Doppler radar presenting what's going on inside thunderstorms. Warn on Forecast is an idea where we're going to take the massive amounts of satellite, radar, and surface data and stick them all into a very high resolution prediction model. And then by producing new forecasts every 15 or 20 minutes, the forecasters hopefully will be able to use that model to produce warnings that extend out to an hour.
Before the National Weather Service can use this tool, it must be developed and tested. One big challenge will be deciding how to get the model predictions to the forecasters.
I'm going to keep this one very low. I'm just adjusting the track.
These hazardous weather prediction models are going to produce a huge amount of output. And this fire hose of data is just too much for forecasters to handle in real time quickly. So in order to help deal with that, NSSL has developed a related project called Facets. And Facets is the methodology which will enable forecasters to focus very quickly on the most important threats.
Once Warn on Forecast and Facets are proven to be reliable and effective, then forecasters will be better able to inform you of threats nearby. Learn more here and follow us.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is located at the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. It is used for experiments that will allow forecasters to learn and apply new technologies.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is a really unique space throughout all of NOAA. And this is where the researchers and the operational folks come together in a common space to solve operational problems and to test new research tools that the research community is working on. The goal is to accelerate the transfer from research to operations of the newest tools and techniques.
People come from around the world to collaborate on this unique project.
We can bring together not only NOAA people, but also university people, faculty, researchers, private sector meteorologists, folks working in other countries in meteorology, forecasters can all come together and focus on what the problem of the day is with the forecasters.
Each spring, several experiments occur in the hazardous weather test bed. Learn more here and follow us.
What are you looking at? And what are you ignoring? Did you notice the NOAA logo in the corner? Forecasters have a lot of information in front of them too. Every second counts during severe weather, and decisions about where to focus are constantly being made. This could be even more challenging in the future. Phased array radar will produce 4 to 6 times more information than what we have now, which brings us to the question researchers are hoping to answer. Will more radar information affect forecasters' decisions?
From our past experiments, we've learned a lot about how forecasters think during the warning decision process, but we've also learned that those thought processes are very complex, and for that reason, we need a better way to be able to track forecasters' cognitive activity.
Inbounds and possibly golf ball sized hail.
An eye tracker is a piece of technology that is used to determine in real time where someone's eye gaze is located. And these eye trackers are typically video-based, which means a camera sits below a computer monitor, and with infrared light and vector analysis, we can determine where a person is looking and how their eyes are moving.
Eye tracking is already being used in the medical field and air traffic control. Using similar research methods, NSSL is discovering the benefit for weather forecasting too. Phased array radar will give forecasters a lot more to think about. Understanding their decision-making process will help researchers develop even more user-friendly tools. So what's the benefit for you? Even better weather warnings. To learn more, check us out online and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine forecast. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. With the southerly flow that we have all up along the west coast of the state, we are expecting some of this ice to push back to the north, and some of it will actually diminish and melt. However, by the end of the week, we are expecting conditions to kind of switch around and have a northerly component to the winds, helping to push back some of that ice down further to the south again, and some ice reforming in some of the areas that it has been very recently here. Looking now at the main part of our marine forecast for the southeastern part of the state, we are having primarily northwesterly flow, with the areas of the Gulf a little bit stronger, 25 to 30 knots expected, where the inside waters 10 to 15 knots expected. Till we get way up to the north, we are expecting southerly winds around 10 knots on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, we are expecting primarily a westerly wind out in the Gulf, 22 to 25 knots, seas as high as 8 feet. In the inside waters, southerly flow 15 to 25 knots, strongest as we get further to the north, and as we get further to the south, switching over to northwesterly winds around 15 knots. For south central Alaska, for the Gulf waters, a southerly direction becoming more westerly as we get further up along the northern part of the Gulf coastline, 20 to 25 knots there, only around 10 knots in Prince William Sound, and Cook Inlet will have a somewhat southerly direction around 10 knots until we get out by the Barren Islands, switching up and becoming easterly at 15. Then on Thursday, all southerly flow for the Cook Inlet area, 10 to 15 knots expected. Out over the Gulf waters, we are seeing southwesterly flow around 20 knots, and then Prince William Sound, weaker winds out of the south around 10 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, starting off by Kodiak Island, southerly flow around 15 knots there. Stronger as we get to the Alaska Peninsula area. Still somewhat southerly on the eastern portions, around 20 knots. But moving around our low pressure, we are seeing some circulation becoming more northerly as we get further to the west, around 15 knots there on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, all winds becoming more westerly, around 20 knots, except for Shelikof Strait, a little bit weaker there. Southwesterly winds around 15 knots for Shelikof Strait. Seas as high as 7 feet on the Pacific side. Then on Wednesday for the Aleutian Islands, primarily a southerly flow for the central Aleutians, 10 to 20 knots, strongest to the west. Out by the east Aleutians, however, northerly flow around 15 knots there. Seas once again higher on the Pacific side, 8 to 9 feet expected, and then way out on the western Aleutians, southwesterly winds 15 knots. For Thursday, staying out of the southwest, 10 to 15 knots for the western Aleutians. Somewhat southerly direction for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, 15 to 20 knots expected there on Thursday. As we look along the west coast of this state, if you're right along the coastline, we are expecting to see some areas of more southeasterly winds in Bristol Bay and then in the Kuskokwim Bay areas. Most of the flow, however, is going to be out of a northerly direction, 15 to 20 knots until we get down by the Pribilofs, a little bit weaker there, around 10 knots. On Thursday, primarily westerly flow around 25 knots. Pribilofs a little bit different, around 10 knots out of a southerly direction there. Then up in the Norton Sound area, we are going to see easterly winds around 15 knots. For the Arctic coastline, down by the Bering Strait area to the southern portions, northwesterly winds 15 knots, but switching out of the east as we get into the Chukchi Sea, around 15 to 20 knots there, and then easterly flow along the Arctic coastline, 10 to 20 knots, weakest as we get off to the east. Then on Thursday, all out of an easterly direction, 30 to 40 knots along the Arctic coastline, strongest out of the east. And then as we get along the west coast of the state, becoming more northerly, 15 to 25 knots, strongest by the Bering Strait area. A quick recap of our tonight's weather, starting off in the western part of the Bering Sea, low pressure system, bringing in some colder air and some snow showers to the western Aleutian Islands. Warmer off to the east, central Aleutians expecting to see primarily rain. Low pressure system headed towards the Bristol Bay area, bringing a lot of southerly winds, warmer air, a lot of rain to the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, starting to get by the Kenai Peninsula up through the Bristol Bay area, YK Delta area, up by Galena and Norton Sound area, all the way up towards the Kotzebue Sound area as well. Some of the higher elevations in the Brooks Range and Alaska Range, cold enough to stay with snow. But much of mainland Alaska underneath the effects of high pressure to the north and a high out over the Gulf, keeping the areas of much of south central and the interior and the panhandle clear of any precipitation for tonight. As we move into Wednesday, some rain starting to sneak in closer to Sitka, not quite there. Still a lot of high pressure out over the Gulf, keeping much of mainland Alaska out of the precipitation. But we're seeing our slow-moving system headed towards Nunavik Island on Wednesday, bringing a lot of rain to Kodiak Island and the Bristol Bay area, up along all of the west coast, up towards the Point Hope area, some of that making it in towards Galena. And then some rain showers for the Aleutians expected as well. Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.